all different kinds. She has all different kinds there. So,
All right, you're good to go.
and,
I didn't get to finish telling you about Ruby.
oh, yeah.
Ruby is, oh goodness, she is having bronchitis. She
Yeah.
has 70% blood oxygen saturation.
Good.
So they put her on some supplemental oxygen, and so that's where we're at. So that's why she's not here today.
Yeah. Well, now y'all heard that, didn't you?
Well, my brother needs prayers for him,
Yeah,
for
we're,
his health.
well,
so.
well, are going to announce that. And John, I'm glad you didn't get my favorite donut,
Which is?
which is the plain glazed.
That's always a good one.
Yeah.
The classic.
It doesn't matter.
I'll have your class.
Okay. All right. Yes, you heard about Ruby, and Kathy requests prayers for her brother Bill, who's had several health problems, but did you say he's doing somewhat better?
Yeah, I spoke to him yesterday because I told him about my W-2, and so I didn't really get a chance to really talk to him, and he was at work too, so he was coughing,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, if he's at work, he's probably doing some better.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and we know Joyce Jackson's back home. You can read most of this, and Nancy Giles, her situation is still the same and requesting prayers. And Chris Fry for his brother-in-law, Gardner Green. He's going to have spinal surgery. Jackie Brotherton requests prayers for her niece, Regina Harper. She has a neurological disorder. And Eric Chapman, again, for his, for the Lamelli family and his niece who have COVID. And Isaac Ramos requests prayers that he finds another job and for the twins' health and for the Ramos family. They have had just a whole lot of difficulties, and they need our prayers and also any help that we can give them that would encourage them, and Isaac for finding another job. And sometimes it looks like, oh, there are tons of jobs out there, but you do have to be qualified
Yeah.
for those, and I'm not sure what his qualifications are, but let's be praying for him and reaching out to them if we can.
Well, you know,
And Deborah Merwar requests prayers also. And then, of course, we have those recovering from surgery and those undergoing chemotherapy and radiation that we have still listed, and also all those who continue to remember. And then here is our Araceli. Woo! Now she is a U.S. citizen. Yay!
Sarah, today is, at the East Chase McDonald's has an anniversary, they're
Oh,
28.
okay.
They're
Okay.
28 today.
Okay, the East Chase McDonald's is 28 today. And then I put all those twos up there because this is February 22nd of 2002, so we would be writing it 2222.
Yeah.
And and I wrote it like that, which is like the digital clocks or calendar show it. So if I turn that upside down, which I'm not going to, but I guess it could.
Sarah, today's our daughter's birthday.
Oh, today's your doctor's birthday.
She was born.
Yeah, yeah. So if we turned it upside down, it would still be two. So, and that won't happen. I have a friend that puts stuff on Facebook, and it's so much stuff, and I'm thinking she must have more time than I do to play around on Facebook. But she had all this stuff out there about when we'd have 1-11-11, or when we did have that, or 11-11-11 when we had that. And that we'll never have 3-33-33 because they're not 33 months 33 days in a month. And then she put out some other stuff about, I am glad you have that much time. But anyway, remember the baby shower that's coming up Sunday for Nalu and Stephanie and their little girl. And then our spring gardening workshop that's Saturday. We're not going to be here Sunday morning, but Gary's supposed to lead singing Sunday night, so we're planning to be back a Sunday night, but we'll be in Ivanhoe Sunday morning. And if you don't know where that is, it's a little bit north of Bonham. And if you don't know where that is, you need to look up your history because Sam Rayburn, who was Speaker of the House longer than anyone else, lived just right outside of Bonham. And in fact, he first bought, I think his family first bought property very close to my little bitty hometown. And my grandfather took care of his pecan trees. So that's my claim to fame. So, but anyway, that's where we'll be. Gary will be reporting on the work there. And let's see. Oh yeah, I had something else. Let's do remember, and I was put this in my Bible. Let's do remember our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. If you noticed on the news last night, Russian troops are in eastern Ukraine under the guise of keeping the peace. And eastern Ukraine is where we have been most of the time that we have gone. The last couple of times I think that Gary has gone, he's been in Kyiv or Lviv, which is over west. But there are a lot of dear Christian brothers and sisters over there where we haven't heard from some of them as to whether they have been able to get, they were saying to at least get the women and children out of eastern Ukraine. And sometimes you might wonder why Ukraine is all that important. And a friend of mine put out a whole list of stuff about Ukraine. He used to live there. He had been there for about 5 years, I think, working in missions there. But I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 of these to think about in terms of not so much the people there. We ought to be concerned about them, and then in particular our brothers and sisters. But why is Ukraine important out here just in the world? It's a democratic, independent, sovereign nation, which used to be part of the USSR back during the Cold War and all like that. It's the first in Europe in proven recoverable resources in uranium. Uranium, is used for, okay. It's second in Europe and 10th in the world in titanium for resources in that. I think titanium is what they use, isn't it, to make hip replacements and stuff. Yeah, and Mother had hip replacement and then had something in her leg or something, and when they took all of that out, she had it framed. so she had her titanium stuff right there, and that's why I could remember titanium.
I was hoping to get some, refund on that.
Yeah. It also has the second largest iron ores in the world and second place in Europe in terms of mercury ore resources. And then a few other things. You may have heard things like it's the breadbasket of Europe. It is the first place in exports in the world in sunflowers and sunflower oil. It has very rich, I'm not going to go into any more of this, but it has very rich black land. I don't know about all of you, but I grew up on a blackland farm. And blackland is very nutrient rich. In fact, I went to Ukraine just shortly after Daddy passed away, the year after Daddy passed away. And when I came home, I told Mother, I said, if you could have heaven on earth, Daddy went to Ukraine when he died. Because I just the fields of wheat and all that were out there. And their black land was blacker than the black land that I grew up on. So there's a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons that Ukraine is important like that a lot of us, I didn't know a whole lot of this. I did know that eastern Ukraine is richer in those minerals and all than western Ukraine. And that's why Putin is trying to get into there. But I just want y'all to remember in your prayers, those sweet people over there. They're just some of the most dedicated people. and they're going through a really tough time. Okay, song.
Number 462. 462. O far faith that will not shrink. We're kind of short today, so sing up. Oh, far faith that will not shrink. Oh, press my every call. I will not tremble on the brink of any earthly wall. I will not murmur or complain beneath the chastening rod. But in the hour of grief or pain, will lean upon His sword. Oh, faith that shines more bright and clear, when tempest rage without, and when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whatever may come, we'll taste and give the hallowed bliss of an eternal home.
Do we have someone for prayer? Would you like to? Yeah. Since we don't have anybody designated, I think.
Stand here, us closer anyway.
Yeah.
Our dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much for bringing us together here today, that we can study your word more. We thank you that Sarah can present this to us and help us to study as we go on. We pray that you'll be with all those that are sick. The list is long and seems to be growing. We pray that you'll be with our government. Now, please be with the Russian government. Please help us help them. We pray that you'll help us in every way to do your will. Help us to know what to do. We pray that you'll forgive us for our sins. In Christ's name, amen.
Oh, let's see. I need a Kleenex, and I think I've got one in here somewhere. Oh, yeah, there it is. Oops. There's a whole bunch of them.
I had news today of another couple that, I know, this is 3 couples that have died of COVID within a week of each other, of the husband and wife dying, and it's just scary.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, that,
I thought it was going away. I thought it was going away.
I know, I don't understand. 2 of the couples live in California,
yeah.
did, and
Had they been sick for a while?
but they're about my age, so they're not, but still.
Yeah.
They all had it, and they, she was taking care of him, and then he died, and then That's good.
Yeah. And
Put my
sometimes in
mask
what they report, it's hard to know if they died of something else but had COVID and that just made it harder. But yeah, it doesn't matter all that much in a way, but that, yeah, that, had they been vaccinated or did you know? Okay. Yeah. And that's
I
a,
put my mask.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. But let's go back into chapter 11. I didn't put out a note page because, or an outline, because chapter 11 kind of outlines itself. And we talked about the importance of faith and what faith is and how faith is described here. And in 11 verse 6, we're all familiar with this, but it's impossible to please God without faith. Because if you come to God, you must believe that He is and also that He rewards. Sometimes people believe that He is, but they believe that He only disciplines or He only zaps you if you don't obey. Well, if you continue to be disobedient, you may have to suffer the consequences of that, even in the end, but we do need to remember that God is a rewarder of those who will seek Him. We looked at Noah, I think, or did we end with Noah? I can't remember exactly how much we said about. I don't think we said too much about Noah. And it says here, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not seen as yet, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. Tell me a few things you know about Noah. Might need to go back to Genesis, right? And I think we'll be learning about Noah a little bit more in our curriculum coming up. But let's just look at a few things. I don't want to just keep repeating and repeating. But you get over to when Noah is born, is something interesting that it says about him. Lamech was his father, and this is over in chapter 5 of Genesis. He's the 7th generation from Seth. And when he had this child, he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." How did he know the Lord had cursed the ground? And when did the Lord curse the ground?
When Adam and Eve left the garden?
Yeah, when, after sin, the ground was cursed. They were going to have to work harder, weren't they? There's a difference in dressing and keeping something and in toiling and the ground not yielding quite as much for you and having to deal with thorns and all of that. But how did he know that?
People were still alive.
Oh, yeah.
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 He was, Methuselah didn't die till the year of the flood.
Yeah. So people were still alive, and did they talk?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. You know, I thought about that sometimes with, you know, how we tell our children important things, and we mentioned this last week. Did Adam and Eve have anything very important to tell their children? Yeah. And do you think they told them? Probably over and over and over again. So Noah or Lamech knew that the ground had been cursed because, and so he says, he makes a prophecy about Noah, that this one will comfort us. Well, how is he going to comfort them? The flood doesn't look like much comfort, does it?
He has a place long ago. The rainbow?
Yeah, there's a rainbow that's, comes as comfort after the flood. Noah was the one who built the ark to save all of those. Basically, it was just his family. And that's sad when you think about it. But at least he saved that many. And what had been happening all this time? Had man just been so good on his own? All by himself? Had he been just really a good man in general? Had been really good up until the time of Noah? No. Would you want to live in a world like that where always the thoughts of the imagination of their heart was only evil continually? You know, I usually ask children that. Would you want to live in a world like that where everybody was just evil all around you? They were thinking, everything that they were thinking about was evil. And Noah moved with fear and prepared that ark. So he had to do something, didn't he? But who saved them? Who saved them? God did. By his grace and mercy, he saved them. They had to be in the ark to be saved. The waters of the flood separated those who were saved and godly from those who were lost and destroyed. And the water destroyed those. And I think it's important to see how water right there made a difference between the saved and the lost. But the main focus here is his faith. He believed God. What had not been seen? What had not been seen?
Rain.
Rain. Rain had not been seen. And you know, when you read the description of the flood, and we're not going to go into that a whole lot because I'm sure we'll go into that some in our classes later. But when you read the description, not only did the rain come down, but it says the fountains of the deep were opened up. So, because there is water underground, isn't there? So it was a great cataclysmic event. And then when you think about what water can do, and when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston area, and it just stayed there and stayed there and stayed there and stayed there, Houston went down a little bit in their sea level. And I can't remember exactly how much, but I remember reading it. I want to say 2 centimeters. That'd be almost an inch. And then it might have been 2 inches, but I think it was 2 centimeters. But that was just for a few days. And that was just water coming down. So there was a tremendous change in the earth at that time. But they had not seen something like that before. And do you think people were real excited about Noah's preaching and teaching and about him building an ark? Did people get out there and encourage him? Come on, we want to be in that. Sometimes you have to do God's work when you're not encouraged. And that gets tough a lot of times. But Noah had to act, and he did act, and he acted based on just what he knew of God, based on his faith in God. Did Noah have as much experience with God? Did Noah have as much information about God as we do? No. And yet he still acted. We have so much more, all this history of God dealing with his people, and yet he still acted. But the one I love, and I'll let y'all talk about this a little bit. I want you to say something about these people. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went, not knowing where he was going. And I always think of dear Sarah, having to follow him, not knowing where you're going. But there had to be that trust. And have there been times in your life that you have gone, maybe not physically gone somewhere, but where you have launched out on faith and didn't know what the end of it would be or where you get to? Yeah, if you've lived very long as a Christian, yeah, and sometimes those ends are difficult for us, but he was going to receive an inheritance, and notice what he did. He lived in tents. Now those weren't little Boy Scout camping tents, but they were dwelling in tents, but he didn't have a place to just, build a mansion like over in Colleyville or somewhere, because he was on the move a lot of the time. And Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise, so they had the same promise. And here is what's interesting. He waited for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker was God. Abraham didn't see everything that we see, but he waited for that special city whose builder and maker is God. And then Sarah received strength to conceive. Now, Sarah didn't believe right at first, did she? Did she kind of mess things up? And do we still see the remnants of that today over in the Middle East? I remember having a really interesting conversation with Peyton a few years ago when Gary was, I don't know where he was, but I went to Atlanta to spend a few days with Peyton. I could get a real cheap airline ticket. And he had a good friend who had a really nice apartment who was going to be out of town that week. So I got to stay in this really nice apartment. His apartment wasn't quite good for Mom to stay in. It was kind of open out there. But at any rate, we went to the Carter Museum. And Jimmy Carter worked really hard to try to bring peace in the Middle East. And so as we were looking at that and everything, Peyton was talking to me some about it. And so I just sat down at the table and we had a really good Bible study just of what happened with Hagar and Sarah and what happened with the people, the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac and so on. And I hope it helped him understand, that the Bible is historically true, and also that we have these things. Okay.
I'll text John and tell him something's.
Yeah.
He's got.
Yeah. Sarah had a child when she was past the age, and we all know what that means. Most of us in here are past the age of having children, aren't we? But she received strength to conceive the child, and therefore from one man, and him as good as dead. He was old too. Were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is on the seashore. Are the Jews still around today? Are they still around today? I remember hearing this one time that someone asked, I think a king, I don't know about this story, if it's true, but someone asked,
What is this sound? Is this your watch?
He didn't answer.
yeah, that's okay.
I'm going to tell him.
Okay. But someone and I don't know if this story is true, but it gives you something at least to think about, that a king asked his court jester, what is the proof of God? Or is there a proof of God? And the court jester said, the Jews, my lord, the Jews. Because what did God promise Abraham? That there'd be all over, the sand of the sea and so on. And also, didn't he promise, that is kind of getting where my head is. But that they would not be completely destroyed. They would not be completely destroyed. Now, they have been persecuted. The Holocaust in particular. And in fact, so they have been persecuted greatly, but they are the only ancient people that are still identifiable. Is or are, I don't remember the only ancient people. But anyway, you get the idea. Even if my grammar is not exactly correct. But they are the only ancient people that are still identifiable. That tells you something about the truth of this book. And it tells you something about God. Okay. Verses 13 through 15. We're going to visit Abraham again. But we see in verses 13 through 15, all of them died in faith. All of them died in faith, not having received the promises, but they saw them afar off, and they were assured of them. They embraced them, and they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Are we like that? Do we confess that we're strangers and pilgrims on the earth? Now, the promises that he's talking about here is the Christ to come. They saw that in shadowy form there, just not receiving it. They saw them, as it says here, from afar. They saw them from afar. But they were assured. They were assured of them. Why were they assured? Who had promised it? God had promised it. So they were assured. And being assured of those, then they confessed that they were just strangers on this earth. Verse 14, for those who say such things declare plainly that they seek an homeland. Oh, they seek an homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they came out, they would have had opportunity to return. Oh. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he's prepared for them a city. See, those like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others faithful, they declared, they thought about their homeland, which was not here on earth. And if they had called to mind, if Abraham had been, and Sarah had been thinking about Ur of the Chaldees, it was more comfortable there. We didn't have to move very often there. My mother used to get really kind of upset with us if we moved. And she would say, the saying, a rolling stone gathers no moss. And Gary would say to me, that's good advice for stones, I guess, and who wants to get moss? Sometimes, as long as you are with God, does it really matter? Does it really matter? And as long as you're doing his work, does it really matter? But they desired a heavenly country. They weren't looking back and saying, Ur of the Chaldees was so much better. In fact, God called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees to get him away from the idolatry that was there. And that's one of the reasons he never really settled, was to get away from the idolatry. Because idolatry was already becoming a part of people's lives and a part of the culture, but they desired a heavenly country. And isn't that what we desire? Isn't that what we desire? A heavenly country? Now, I like my little house at 7124 Middle Park South, you know. I like it. I'm sure you like yours. Or your apartment, or whatever. But this world is not my home. This world is not my home. And I have this friend, she's the one that also puts out all this stuff on Facebook, but I was asking her about her address. I was going to mail her something, and she said, I always put in care of, you know, put my name, Linda Sneed, and then in care of whatever her address is, because this is not my permanent home. And I thought, you know, it seemed a little odd to me, but then I thought, yeah, it's not. And so this is where I am right now, but it's not my permanent home. But she also will not capitalize Satan, even though that's a proper noun. She won't capitalize Satan. And any political figure that she disagrees with, she won't capitalize either. So I'll let you guess who that is. But at any rate, I kind of like the in care of, you know, because that does communicate something. But God is not ashamed to be called their God because he's prepared for them a city. What about us? Has he prepared for us a city? A city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. But we're going to go on with Abraham and with Isaac here, because these are two that, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. There was a great test here, but there was also a great reward. I'm not going to go into quite as much detail as I did in my book about this, but this is one of those things that a lot of times teachers of children have had trouble with, and I think I mentioned this in the book, that when I was visiting with Peyton, and he was in his 20s, so he wasn't a little kid, so he didn't misunderstand. You know, sometimes little kids will misunderstand something. But he said, there's one Bible story I would never teach to little children. And I said, well, what's that? He said, when God asked Abraham to offer Isaac. He said, that scares the little kids. And that, you know, that hit me. He was probably scared half silly when he was taught that in Bible class. And most of the pictures show Isaac as a little boy, don't they? And that is scary to a little kid. And, you know, some little kids, the reason Peyton's an actor and a storyteller is because he gets into the story, whatever it is. I've seen him when he was just a little kid on TV. There was some girl that was in a role, I've forgotten what it was, but she was sitting in a window and thinking about jumping, and he yells out, "Don't jump, don't jump!" You know, he was all into the story. And so a child like that will see this. He said it makes the child scared that God would ask him to do, his father to do the same thing. And, you know, I wish I had known when he was little that he was that scared. He never said anything to me about it, but I reminded him of what I had taught him at home. He said, I know what you taught me. I'm just telling you what I was taught in Bible class. And a lot of times kids remember Bible class more than they remember maybe what we teach. It's kind of strange, you would think. But anyway, Isaac was not a little kid. Isaac was in his 30s. How do I know that? He was, the very next chapter, Sarah dies, and he's 36, I think, when she dies, something like that. And then he marries Rebecca, and he's 40. A lot of commentators will say, and a lot of our brethren will say, well, he was at least a teenager because he could carry the wood, okay? But here, Isaac is a shadow of Christ. Because who else offered his only begotten son? God did. And in John 8, Jesus said, your father Abraham desired to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And there's a verse somewhere in Matthew, and I've forgotten where it is right now, because I wasn't there, that says, where Jesus tells his apostles, many righteous men desired to see what you see and didn't, and to hear what you hear and didn't. But then he says, Abraham saw his day. I believe it's right here where Abraham saw his day. Abraham saw what his salvation and what our salvation would cost God. It would cost God his only begotten son. And Abraham reenacted the gospel right here. He desired to see it, and God said, okay, you want to see it? Here it is. Here it is. Did that require faith? Trust. Abraham didn't know how it was going to turn out as far as, he didn't know that God was going to supply a ram. He didn't know that. He didn't know that God would, but he did tell Isaac when Isaac said, where's the sacrifice? He did say, God will provide the lamb. Isn't that the story of the Bible? Like we heard Sunday, God provided the sacrifice there. God provided the sacrifice here. God provided the lamb. Isaac had to trust, didn't he? Kids were going to identify with Isaac. Didn't Isaac have to trust his father? Did he have to trust God? Yeah. We don't have anything about Isaac fighting his dad. He could have. He was a strong young man. And Abraham's old. But Isaac had some faith there too. And Isaac had to trust his father, and he had to trust God. But Abraham knew that God could raise the dead. That's what he knew. Do you know that? When we say have the kind of faith that Abraham had, that's the kind he had. That God could raise the dead. And he said to his the people with him, there in Genesis 22, you can read all of this there. He said to them, he said, you stay here with the animals. You stay here while the lad, he uses the word lad, and that's what we get little kid, because when we think lad, we think here. But the Hebrew word for lad there is usually applied to a young man in deference to an older man. It's also the same word that was used when Abraham had the war, and met Melchizedek and all like that. And Abraham said he wouldn't take any of the spoils except what the lads, that was the word that was used, that were with him. They were old enough to go to war. So that word actually should have been translated there, young man. But we latch onto the English word instead of looking at the Hebrew word and seeing what. And some translations of the Bible will have in the margin, young man. They really should have had young man there. But Adam Clark, a commentator, says that Isaac was around 33. Josephus said 25. That's close to 33. If you're concerned that Sarah said something that nobody else had said. That's one thing that Sarah had to do when she was writing was back up conclusions that I had made a long time ago without looking at Adam Clark or whatever, and back it up with that, because as I told Iris Ramsey, people will say, oh, Johnny Ramsey said that. Yeah, it must be true. But if a woman says that, you know, we've got to check on it. And so we, I did that. But to get off of that, and sometimes we say God tested Abraham's faith. Well, yeah, faith was tested. God tested Abraham's love. Did he love God more than he loved Isaac? Well, his love was tested. But actually, the Bible says God tested Abraham. God tested his character. God tested everything, you know, everything that he was. His emotions, everything was laid on the line there. Look at Romans 4, because there is another place where this is. Romans 4. And let's just go back to verse 13. This is going to be a kind of a lengthy reading. For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. You see, here Paul is, again, writing in terms of, you know, that the Jews wanted to bind circumcision and bind the law. And he said, wait a minute, law hadn't been given when the promise was made to Abraham. And so the promise was not through the law, but on the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void, and the promise is made to none effect, because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore that is the promise, it is of faith, that it might be according to grace. Yeah. It's a faith that it might be according to God's grace. So that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. And you know, we studied Galatians and learned that too. And then in verse 17, as it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him whom he believed, God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Did God give life to Sarah's dead womb? Did he call Isaac, who did not exist, as though he did exist? In Isaac shall your seed be called. Not in one of your household servants or whatever, but in Isaac. And yet, Isaac at that time had not been born. He didn't give his name. So I'll say that. Okay. Who, we're talking now about Abraham, contrary to hope, in hope believed. So, and the King James says, against hope, believed in hope, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. Okay, and not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God, and being fully convinced that what he had promised he was able to perform. And therefore it was accounted unto him for righteousness. Now it was written not for his sake alone, that it might be imputed to him, but also for us. It shall be imputed to us who believe in him who did what? Raised Jesus our Lord from the dead, who was delivered up because of our offenses and was raised for our justification. So right here on the mountain, when Abraham offered Isaac, he knew where Isaac had come from. Isaac had come from a dead womb. Isaac knew where he had come from. Don't you think they told him? Yeah. Isaac knew. Isaac knew where he'd come from. And Isaac also trusted his father, and had to trust God, but concluding that God could raise the dead. Abraham's experience with God before this test had been one of faith and trust, and so Abraham's experience here is still one of faith and one of trust. And I don't like to, in fact, I appreciated some of the things that John said Sunday, but I also don't like to push my stuff, my work. And I told Gary, I said, I'm going to tell him if he has an opportunity to preach that again, just leave me out of it. And just, and Gary said, why? And I said, haven't you heard the statement, or preachers in particular, hide behind the cross? I said, I just want to hide behind the cross and the gospel. And he said, well, you can peek out just a little bit, you know. I can't be serious with him 5 minutes. But anyway, Stephanie Griffith, who's teaching the children at Brown Trail from these books, she said, I had always dreaded teaching that Abraham offered Isaac to children. But she said, when I read your book, I was looking forward to teaching it. And this is one of the Bible stories that the atheists pick out and say, oh, isn't that a ridiculous God asking a father to sacrifice his child? That's so ridiculous. And then other people will point to it. And it is ridiculous if you take Christ out of the picture, isn't it? And there are others who will say, well, this is a contradiction because God did not allow, human sacrifice. But God did make a major sacrifice, a godly sacrifice, both human and divine sacrifice in Jesus. But they try to make this a contradiction in the Bible. But when you see it as pointing to Jesus, when you see it as Abraham seeing Jesus' day, it's a story of great faith. And there's another little thing that I'll just point out to you that some people don't notice, but I think it's important. I had one preacher tell me, oh, it's not important. And I thought, well, okay, maybe it's not but to you, but it is to me. And in Genesis 22, when God asked Abraham, told him what to do, to take your son, go to where I'll show you, and offer him as a sacrifice. Abraham got ready, and when he saw where he was supposed to go, it says, on the third day. On the third day. In Abraham's mind, Isaac was dead for 3 days because he knew he was going to have to sacrifice him. He didn't know that what God was going to do, but he knew that God could raise the dead. How long was Jesus in the grave?
3 days.
I think that's important. It's a little fact that you can sometimes overlook, but I think it's important. Oh, I'm sorry I kept going on that too long, but that's just one of my favorite. We'll look at Isaac blessing Jacob and Esau next time. I was going to finish up chapter 11. I didn't. Okay, and it's about time for another song. And then let's have our donuts and strawberries. And I'm sorry that people online won't get to enjoy them with us.
Number 927, He is able. This song was our theme song for Our Lady's Day several years ago. And no one knew it then, and probably no one remembers it.
I remember this song in what do you call the singing class.
927.
Oh, I thought you were going to do He is able to deliver the older song, but this is good. This is good too.
It's a newer song.
Well, this is
But
good
this is-
anyway. Let's see. He is able, more than able, to accomplish what concerns me today. He is able, more than able, to handle anything that comes my way. He is able, more than able, to do much more than I could ever dream. He is able, more than able, to make me what He wants me to be. Let's sing it again. He is able, more than able, to accomplish what concerns me today. He is able, more than able, to handle anything that comes my way. He is able, more than able, to do much more than I could ever dream. He is able, more than able, to make me what He wants me to be.
Good song. We'll sing it next week too. Let's do it next week too. Let's do it next week too. Okay. Because we'll be angry. Since it's 2, this is kind of neat that it's 2, and you didn't even have 2 strawberries.
But as long as we're able to.
It's able, that's it, that's right.
Yeah.
You're good. I have an issue.
Oh, there's a cinnamon one. Ugh. I don't know where.
They're over there.
Oh, they're over here. Oh.
I wish they'd quit.
We just needed to watch.
Well, it took me 5 minutes to figure out where it was. I'm so confused.
They're trying to keep us on our toes.
Is the computer turned off?
Oh, yeah, we better turn the computer off. It's good for you. Let's see, somebody ought to take the donuts and put it in the front of the camera and. Let's see, I know what, I can do this. Just for the fun of it, yeah,
Sorry for the
okay.
interruption of class.
We wanted to get pictures of it.
Oh, okay, did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay.